anterior thigh muscles, these collectively are called the hamstrings. These are a group of 3 muscles. One of these muscles has 2 heads, so we can kind of consider them to be 4 groups or 4 muscular structures. So on the medial aspect, we have the semitendinosus. Lateral to that, we have the semimembranosus. On the lateral aspect, we have the biceps femoris, and biceps femoris actually has 2 heads. So there is a long head, which we can see here just by looking at the posterior surface of the thigh muscles. But if you go a little bit deeper to the biceps femoris long head, there was also a short head shown underneath as well. So semitendinosus, semimembranosus, and then biceps femoris, the long head, and then deep to this is the short head of that muscle. Okay, let's move down to the anterior leg muscles here. So these muscles are located on the leg, the anterior compartment of the leg. And these involve muscles that have an action of extension of the knee joint. So extending the knee joint, opening up the angle across the knee joint. Think about a kicking action or kicking out your leg. These are the general functions of the muscles we're going to speak about here. These include fibrillaris longus, which is this muscle at the lateral aspect. Deep to that is fibrillaris brevis. And when you see the term fibrillaris, this is interchangeable with peroneus. So fibrillaris or peroneus longus is more lateral and external. And then deeper to that is fibrillaris or peroneus brevis. On the anterior thigh proper, we've got tibialis anterior. So important landmark for that is going to be the tibia itself. So here's the tibia, part of that bone being exposed. And then the lateral to that bone, we've got the tibialis anterior. And then we've got the tendons of a few ligaments that run down into the foot. The extensor digitorum longus, which helps to extend the digits, and then extensor hallucis longus, which is this medial tendon, that is going to extend the great toe itself. Okay, so extensor digitorum longus extends, or think about fanning out the toes. Extension is going to be raising or fanning the toes out. And then extensor hallucis longus is extension or fanning of the great toe or the big toe specifically. On the posterior compartment of the leg, we've got the gastrocnemius, so the large bulky muscle that we know as the calf muscles is called the gastrocnemius, 2 large heads of the gastrocnemius that are inserted on this tendon and eventually insert onto the heel. Deep to that is the soleus muscle. So if we were to reflect or retract the gastrocnemius muscle, here we've got the soleus muscle. So we can see the cut surface of the soleus muscle here. And these 2 muscles are involved in dorsiflexion. So think about pointing the toes downward, right? And if you kind of do that action of pointing your toes or flexing your toes, you can see or you can feel that function, that pulling that's happening in your calf muscles. If we strip away the gastrocnemius and soleus, there are a few other posterior muscles here. The plantaris is this really small muscle that is located closer to the knee region, the posterior knee region. It's mostly tendon, and it's very comparable to the palmaris longus muscle. So we talked about the palmaris longus muscle in the forearm, in the upper extremity, and we mentioned it being a very small muscle with not a very clear or very unique function, and being mostly tendon and a little bit of muscle. And the plantaris muscle is very similar to that muscle. We've got the tibialis posterior, which is posterior to the tibia here. We've got the flexor digitorum longus on the medial aspect rather, and then the flexor hallucis longus on the medial surface here. The lateral surface rather. So the function of these 2 muscles, the flexor digitorum longus and the flexor hallucis longus, is flexion or crouching of the toes. So we talked about the extensor version of these muscles, which are on the anterior aspect of the leg. Whereas the flexor version of these muscles are doing the opposite function. So they're going to be crouching or clawing of the toes, which we call flexion of the toes. Digitorum longus is going to flex all four of the digits or all four of the toes, whereas flexor hallucis longus is specifically flexion of the great toe or the big toe. Let's look at the joints in the foot. So in the foot, we've got the talocrural joint, which is really the ankle joint. This is the articulation between the tibia, the fibula, and the talus. Remember, the talus was one of our tarsal bones of the ankle, and it's the bone that sits on top of the calcaneus. And so where the talus articulates with the tibia medially and the fibula laterally, we call it the talocrural or the ankle joint. In the foot, we've also got the metatarsophalangeal joint. That's between the metatarsals and the phalanges, the proximal row. We've got the PIP or the proximal interphalangeal joint between the proximal row and the middle row. And then we've got the DIP, the distal interphalangeal joint between the middle row of phalanges and the distal row. We want to bear in mind here that we have only a distal interphalangeal joint. There's no PIP in the great toe because there's no middle phalange in the great toe. Let's talk about some of the muscles of the foot. So whereas we saw the digitorum longus muscles in the foot, in the, not the foot, in the leg itself, in the foot, we're going to see the digitorum brevis version of these muscles. Okay, so extensor digitorum brevis found on the anterior or the dorsal surface of the foot is going to also be contributing to the extensor digitorum longus function, which was extending the toes. And then extensor hallucis brevis is, again, the shorter version of this muscle found on the dorsal surface of the foot that is going to be contributing to the extensor hallucis longus function, which is extension of the great toe. So we can kind of group these muscles together by their function. The short version of the muscles are in the foot itself, whereas longus, or the long version of these muscles, are going to be in the leg. And if you think about the word brevis means short, and these are the smaller or shorter versions of these muscles, and the word longus means a long, and the long version of these muscles are found in the leg themselves. But the functions are really collective. The functions are the same. Likewise, on the plantar surface of the foot, we've got the flexor hallucis brevis, which flexes the great toe, and we've got the flexor digitorum brevis, which flexes the other digits. And again, these are going to be the short versions of these muscles. We also saw the longest version of these muscles in the posterior compartment of the leg.